This teenage girl allegedly killed her parents in a case that had gone unsolved for months. That is until this week. Her parents were found shot dead inside their home in February. Their 6-year-old daughter found them. But you will not believe the next part. We sure couldn't. The alleged teen killer spoke at the funeral for her parents at their church.
Although there's nothing we can do to bring them back, we still have control over how we treat people.
And then let's talk about the TikTok account that we found. Just wait until I show you what she said about her family and this case on social media. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. I will tell you, this story made our jaws drop when police in Georgia this week announced they had made an arrest in the case of a murdered couple that had gone unsolved since February. Here's a picture of that couple, James and Kristen Brock. They lived in Carrollton, Georgia. It's a little more than an hour's drive south of Atlanta. This couple, they were beloved members of their community, devoted churchgoers, and they also had a 6-year-old daughter together. In fact, James posted this on Facebook on February 19th, saying, quote, "When I'm down and don't feel good, I find comfort in this little girl." Police say he was murdered within the next 24 hours of that post. Reportedly, it was that little girl, who was 5 at the time, who found him and her mom, Kristen, after they had been shot. It was on February 20th that law enforcement responded to this home in Carrollton and found the Brocks shot. They were both in their bed. This case went unsolved for months. Kristen's dad, in the days after the murders, offered $5,000 for information that would lead police to the killer. He told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that these murders, whoever did them, quote, was cold-blooded. This week, police announced that they know who the killer is, and it was someone that he knew, someone he knew very well.
Today, we can confirm that an arrest has been made in the case. Kristen Brock's 17-year-old daughter, Sarah Grace Patrick, has been taken into custody and charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault.
Here's the mugshot of the alleged killer, Sarah Grace Patrick. Her mugshot was given to us by the Carroll County Sheriff. Sarah Grace was 16 years old at the time that she allegedly shot and killed her mom and stepdad. And she was very active on social media, and it is shocking what I'm about to show you. Here are pictures that we found on her social media with her boyfriend, and wow, when I talk about social media, that is a shocking part of this story. I'll get more to that in just a moment. Here's what we know about Sarah Grace. According to law enforcement, she lived in the home at the time of the murders, but had moved around with different family members within the last couple of years. But on the night of the Brock's murders, she was the one who called 911. I actually saw someone comment on social media that it was suspicious after gunshots went off in the house that it was the 5-year-old who would find their parents dead and then reportedly have to alert the teenager inside the home that something was wrong. Sarah Grace was 16 years old at the time that law enforcement say she killed her mom and stepdad. She's now 17. In cases like this, typically we search through TruthFinder to see if the suspect has any previous charges or if there's anything we can learn. Because she's so young, not a lot came up. I also used TruthFinder to look at James and Kristen Brock's background, and neither of them appear to have criminal records, which just speaks to that on top of the beloved members of the community that so many people say that they were. At Law&Crime, we partner with TruthFinder and we use it to get details on people involved in our stories. But even if you don't work in true crime, this can be a great resource to give you some peace of mind. It is one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. Right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Go to truthfinder.com/OTC. You can also scan the QR code on your screen or use the link below. Here's what law enforcement said when they were asked about an alleged motive.
We are still working with her diligently. Our investigators have been speaking with her.
It is correct that she was the one who made the 911 call, correct?
Yes.
At what point did investigators begin to focus on her as the suspect?
So I believe in the beginning of any case, everyone's a suspect. I think I told many of you that when we were on scene that day. However, as an investigation continues and everything ebbs and flows, like I said in my press release, mountains of evidence has gotten us through here today. Lots of processing, lots of working with our law enforcement partners to get us to where we are today that honed in on her as a suspect.
As police are still searching for a reason Sarah Grace would allegedly do this, it's important to note that Sarah was public about the loss of her parents. She even spoke at their funeral. Look at this video per WSB TV.
Although there's nothing we can do to bring them back, we still have control over how we treat people.
We were shocked with what we saw specifically on her TikTok. She presented herself as a victim, a young girl who lost her parents to senseless violence. But again, as you watch these, law enforcement say she's the one who did it. Look at this post. This is from March 1st, just weeks after she allegedly killed her mom and stepdad in their sleep. She posts a tribute video to them with the caption, quote, "They don't know it, but a year from now, me and my 5-year-old sister would find them wrongfully shot dead in our home and won't get to watch me graduate high school, see me walk down the aisle, and couldn't even say goodbye." Here's a video of her crying. This was posted on March 18th, less than a month after she allegedly killed her parents, with the caption, quote, "Please send prayers for healing and a break from everything. I'm so tired, I should probably delete later." And here's a picture from a TikTok on Mother's Day this year in May with Kristen, who she allegedly murdered, with the caption, "But my ultimate inspiration comes from my best friend." And here she is crying, heading to the funeral of the 2 people she allegedly killed. She also has this picture that reads, "What do you mean I can't call my mom?" And then there's this one that says, quote, "Why me?" Now, these are incredibly sad, but then you have to remember that law enforcement says they have a mountain of evidence that shows she is the one who did this. At the same time, she also appears to have continued to live her life beyond the alleged cover-up that she killed 2 people. Just a week ago, she posted this video from a beach. In their news conference, law enforcement said that Sarah Grace turned herself in after she was told that she was going to be charged with the murders of the Brocks. Her biological father, law enforcement say, drove her to the station. The sheriff's office also said there was a, quote, "mountain of evidence that ties her to these murders," but they wouldn't go deeper into that at this point. As for the little girl, the Brock's daughter, the half-sister of their alleged killer, the now 6-year-old girl who allegedly found her parents dead in their bed, law enforcement says she is now living with family members. Joining us now to talk about this case is retired crime scene investigator Alina Burrows. Thank you for joining us on Law and Crime. There's a lot to unpack here. I mean, it was shocking to hear that a 17-year-old, she was 16 at the time, would allegedly kill her mom and stepdad, and then to see the social media. So there's a lot of places we could start. I guess for you, when you look at this suspect, Sarah Grace Patrick, what stands out to you?
Obviously it's, as you say, it's a shocking case because we don't have a lot of parenticide cases, right? We don't have a lot of those, especially with a female suspect. So there's some different kind of unique aspects of this particular case. Am I shocked by the behavior afterwards? Not really. I've seen this behavior before. I think people are kind of familiar with Casey Anthony, who was, obviously ultimately found to be not guilty, but her behavior after the crime shows maybe a disassociation. Maybe there's some attempt to detach from that aspect and just continue on living life. That's not something that we haven't seen before, so it doesn't really surprise me.
I've seen in some cases where you have a suspect and police, law enforcement in Carroll County didn't go too deep into specifically what they have, but they just said it's a mountain of evidence. And you're a crime scene investigator, and I'm sure you've had cases where someone tries to cover it up and might play it off as, oh my gosh, this all happened. What are some of the first things you're looking for if you were the person who entered this house as an investigator that can start to piece together a picture of what happened?
Sure. And they don't know in the beginning that this could potentially be a domestic homicide, but domestic homicides can be challenging because when you look at a suspect and a victim that maintain the same residence, the normal things that investigators find may not have that same relevance. So her fingerprints would be expected to be in the home of her parents. Her, shoe tracks or footprints, all of those things, DNA, those are all to be expected to be in a home where she would either live or visit. So unless they're in a particularly specific location, right? Unless we had, fingerprints on a murder weapon, or unless we had her fingerprints in the victim's blood, something that would place her there at that particular time. And even still, if she found the victims and made the 911 call, you could also explain away some of those things. So it becomes challenging in cases like that. It's not so much what you have as much as what you don't have. And in this particular case, we don't see signs of forced entry. We don't see signs that anything was taken or missing. So that kind of typical, maybe there's a third party intruder that's attempted a burglary or a robbery. Our victims are still in bed. So that tells us that they weren't confronting somebody in their home. They were killed when they were at their most vulnerable state, sleeping.
And there was a comment that I saw that I thought was interesting, because it was reported that the then 5-year-old who was in the house, that she was the one who found the parents and then alerted her teenage sister, who then calls 911. It just seemed bizarre that it would be the 5-year-old that would hear the gunshot, go into the room, and then, I have a, one that's almost 4, and it just seemed like a lot of steps for someone who's 5 to go through to then alert the teenager, and the teenager in this, it wasn't a mansion where this happened, wouldn't have heard these gunshots.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Something else that we want to consider too is, where is the firearm? Was this a firearm that was kept in the household? And if so, who knew where it was? Was it in a safe that required a knowledge of a passcode of some kind? Or was this a firearm that was brought into the home? So if it had already existed in the home, then who would know where it was kept and have access to it? And if it was brought from outside, then that indicates premeditation in this case.
I go to these social media posts, and it's just, I think it's shocking for a lot of people. We were not sure if it was hers, because it was just so outrageous to think that this is the way that she would have played this. And it's, of course, all alleged at this point. There's a lot of information that we don't know, but then law enforcement confirmed to us that that is actually her TikTok account. I know we talked about Casey Anthony, and it's something that doesn't surprise you as much, but what information typically can you get? And when you look at some of these TikToks that could be used in a case going forward?
Well, I know that investigators, speaking of digital evidence on the whole first, investigators are going to be looking at that for a couple of reasons. One is, where her digital footprint was at the time of the crime, if she is home sleeping or if she's somewhere else. Obviously, she's home during these times, so the phone is going to confirm that. But more importantly than that, they're going to be looking at any kind of text message or messaging communications and social media to look for co-conspirators. So when we have young suspects or young offenders, it would not be uncommon that they've discussed this. We don't know the relationship she had with her parents. So that's kind of a big question mark. We don't know if there was any sort of mitigating circumstance, abuse, neglect, something like that. We don't know any of that. So they're going to be looking at text messages to see if there are potentially co-conspirators in this case, somebody that could have helped or at least talked through this with her. Separate from that, just looking at her TikTok or her social media that afterwards doesn't reveal somebody that seems to be grieving. I caution of two things. One is I try not to judge how people grieve, because everybody grieves different. It's different based on your age. It's different based on your culture. But I think people expect a certain type of behavior. And keep in mind that she is very young. And I remember having a conversation with a member of Casey Anthony's defense team that said her brain is not fully developed to handle some of these things. And I think that's something that we're going to see coming out of her defense in the future. Yeah,
and that's a fascinating part of it, because I know it's, and you would know better than I, that it's typically someone in their mid-20s, right, where your brain has fully developed. She's being charged as an adult. but at the same time is 17 years old. What are some of the pieces of evidence that can be used in an interrogation where it was unclear whether she's admitted to it? She turned herself in when she was told she had warrants for her arrest, but as you're gathering information to then lead to the point where someone is going to be interrogating her and trying to get more information, what are you looking for?
Well, a couple of the things that I mentioned. One is, everybody wants to know motive, right? We don't have to have motive in a court case, but human beings want to understand. So I think they're going to be definitely looking at the relationship that she had, especially given that this was a step parent and a biological parent. Looking at that relationship, was there anything out of the norm? They're going to be looking at her. We don't know we don't know her mental health. We don't know a history of substance abuse. We don't know all of these things that could come into play. So they're going to be looking at that, certainly. And again, social media, I think messaging and text messaging to determine if this was being planned, if it was premeditated, if there was somebody else that was talking her into this. All of those things are going to come into play, as well as whatever physical evidence, right? So I don't know the physical evidence that they have at this time, but just looking at the picture, when we see victims that are in bed, we know that they are at their most vulnerable state. So that's not somebody that was, we've ruled out self-defense. There is no self-defense because they're in bed. We've ruled out third party coming in, burglarizing the house, something that has alerted them. They've awakened. There's no fighting. They're in bed. So all of those things kind of are clues that piece together who could have potentially done this. And then we're going to start looking at what links together that crime scene with that offender.
This happened in February 20th. And just yesterday, as we're recording this, is when it was announced that Sarah Grace Patrick would be charged with the murders of her mom and stepdad. What do you make of the time from when it happened to now there being an arrest?
Well, it tells me law enforcement has to have time to do their investigations. Potentially they were looking at other suspects. They've got to look at every piece of evidence and follow that down that path until it is no longer possible. And then they would turn and take a different course. So I'm assuming that during this time, they might have had an eye towards her, but they were probably also ruling out anything else, which is good. We want a thorough investigation. What I don't want is law enforcement to feel pressure to make an immediate arrest because it's a shocking case. It's a town where everybody says, this doesn't happen in our town. There could be pressures on law enforcement to make a quick arrest. And that often does not bode well for, in the long run. They could find somebody that is to pin that case on that isn't necessarily a true suspect. So I like the fact that they're taking time and making sure that they've got all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted.
How likely is it, and hard to say at this point, but in your experience, that she would have known that she might be a suspect in these murders? Or from a from the standpoint of law enforcement, how do you kind of keep tabs on her and she may be someone and the evidence starts piling up to the point where they said it was a mountain of evidence they have against her, but at the same time, letting her continue to live her life to see if she makes any other alleged mistakes?
Sure. And that's not uncommon in the law enforcement arena. But once they have determined that that is a viable suspect, I'm quite sure that there was some surveillance. We've seen that repeatedly in cases, even with the Idaho cases and Brian Koberger, there was surveillance on him before any type of arrest was made. So I don't think that was uncommon.
And then just lastly, I just think, and we talked about this a bit at the beginning, 16, 17 years old, her entire life was ahead of her. We'll see how the case plays out. She's facing the potential of never seeing the outside of a prison ever again. In these cases where you see this type of violence, I mean, what are some of the driving factors that typically lead to these types of stories?
It's anybody's guess at this point. And I wouldn't want to advance any theories that appear to be victim blaming. In the past, I have seen cases like this where anger is directed at parents for, obviously nobody deserves to be murdered, but there can be some mitigating circumstances. Is there some sort of abuse going on? So not in this case in particular, but in past cases that I've worked, similarly, there has been abuse from a potential like a stepfather or father figure, and then mom who is either aware of it and doesn't do something to remedy the situation, or is perceived to not do anything, also becomes a target. We've seen that. I don't know if that's going to come into play in this case. It can also be mental illness where there's some perceived wrong. They could have told her that she couldn't date a particular boy, and she could have been angry about that. We don't really know.
Yeah, it'll be very fascinating once the information starts to come out and you understand why law enforcement say they have this mountain of evidence against her. And then, of course, what the defense would be, how much she's admitted to. That is all. It all remains to be seen. Alina Burrows, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.